Hi, everybody. Hope you've been enjoying your session so far and learned quite a bit from all the speakers. Very glad to be here from Canada. I know most of you are in Turkey and it is your afternoon, but it's early morning here. And I'm very happy to tell you about some of the work that we've been doing to build an AI ecosystem and community. So I'm going to get started, by introducing myself first. So I'm originally from Iran, your neighbor country, and came to Canada in 2008 to start a PhD in physics in quantum computing. In 2014, I graduated from that degree and went to England, to University of Oxford, and worked there as a postdoctoral researcher. After that, I came back to Canada and I started working in financial industry, originally as a data scientist, but then, moved on to management and eventually found my way in product management and built a natural language processing product that was used in a bank for, analyzing a lot of different types of documents. And I'm still, very proud that it is being used even after I left. So in 2019, I started my company, Aggregate Intellect, that I will tell you more about as we go on. So what we are building is, what we call a smart knowledge management platform. The idea of it is to really enable collaborative innovation, which is really the topic of this conference. Collaboration between Turkish ecosystem and Canadian ecosystem. That's really one of the important things that we're trying to build and enable through our platform. Really, the most fundamental question that we're trying to answer is how might we enable research and development teams to build products with much less risk and therefore higher success rate. And the way we are doing this is by building a global expert system, expert network, where a lot of people from all the corners of the world gather on our platform, talk about interesting things in AI research, engineering, and product development, and really try to help each other build more interesting things. A very important component of our platform and very important principle of our platform is collaborative experimental design. And what that means is enabling people to interact with each other, collaborate with each other, and therefore, build designs that are, very, very suitable for R&D projects, which are very, very experimental. And importantly, I think the most exciting component of the platform we're building is an AI augmented knowledge curation component. And I will sort of, tell you more about that as we go forward. But let's, go back to how all of this started. So in 2008, I, was missing reading papers. So I, talked to a few friends and we started gathering every week to read papers and discuss it with each other. This group very, very quickly, within a few months, grew to about 400 people. Like, there were 400 people on our mailing list. They show up every other week, read papers, discuss it, essentially do nerdy things. After a while, people started complaining that they're missing the sessions and they would love it if we can record them. So we set up a YouTube channel. That YouTube channel is, today around 15,000 subscribers, and we have hundreds of videos. But it started because people were saying, they needed a version of the talks that they can watch later. Eventually, I started feeling like I can't do all the work. So I formed a steering committee. At first it was just myself, one person. It grew to about 6 people very shortly. And today we have more than 40 experts on various topics in AI, again, like research, engineering, and product development. And finally, we decided that we needed a platform. And as I said, that platform is for collaborative and intelligent innovation. So just to put all of this in context, I started from tackling a problem that I had, and it was a meaningful problem. I needed access to knowledge. And very quickly, I learned that there was a need for some permanent version of those discussions to exist for people to consume asynchronously. After a while, as people were engaging with what I was doing, I learned that some of them are a lot more enthusiastic. So identifying those sort of experts and super members and enabling them to help me was a very, very important component to help me grow this community. And ultimately, I really wanted to make this really big and have global reach. Therefore, we needed to build a software platform that enabled to do that. So just to summarize then, if I want to provide a recipe for how a community can be built around advanced topics like AI, I think I can summarize it in 6 steps. So step 1 is finding a problem that is very meaningful to yourself, ideally, and a number of people around you. And in our case, it was access to experts and curated knowledge. So that was the problem that we started. That's a problem we're still trying to solve. So that's a very, very meaningful problem. So starting from that really enabled us to attract a lot of people who cared about the same problem and were looking for a solution for it. So step 2 was finding a way to nurture them. So this is very important because people need to learn and be enabled to do things. And it needs to happen in a way that they can consume it on their own terms and timeline. So building things like utilities or creating content for them that they can use whenever they want is very, very important to nurture and grow a community. The third step was really to figure out the processes, constantly think about what are the things that I'm doing all the time, and can I create playbooks so that other people that I'm delegating to can follow those. So creating those processes and playbooks were very important. The fourth step was, of course, quality control. You could always grow a community that loses the central thesis that it had. So it is very important to have a way to do quality control for people who enter the community. But that's a tricky one because at the same time, you want to be as inclusive and welcoming as possible. So the policy that we ended up taking was, we're just open to anybody who wants to come in. The only thing is that we're going to keep the quality and level of content and discussions that we have very, very high. So if you're serious about AI, you can stick around and enjoy these. But if you're just curious, most probably this is not the right medium. So that really helped us control the quality of the people who were coming to our community and sticking around. The fifth step that I think is the most fundamental one, and it might be something that you have from the very beginning, but most probably you sort of work on it and evolve it until you get to something that is very meaningful, is the fact that you have to take a stance on something that is very meaningful to the users. You can't be a community that is about everything. You have to have a thesis. You have to have an epic meaning, because otherwise people can't relate to you. They're not going to gather around you. So having that is extremely important. And I'll go a little deeper into that in a minute. And step 6 is, either you find a platform that already exists. Some people use Twitter, Discord, Slack, etc. If for what you're doing, those are enough, then that's great. But in my experience, in most cases, you need to develop a platform that enables you to really empower your members, your users, to do interesting things. And in our case, it ended up being the automated knowledge curation. I will talk about that a little further as well. So, as I said, having this epic meaning and taking a stance on something very important and meaningful is extremely important. And in our case, this epic meaning was that from the very beginning, I was very, very insistent on the fact that, in my opinion, learning that happens outside of experience and experiential practices, and importantly, in outside of project and product-based ways of doing things, will not have permanence. You're not going to retain it. You can learn a lot of theories, but unless you try to use them, it's very hard to retain that knowledge. And even on the most researchy theoretical topics, normally you don't remember things unless you have tried to use them for an application. So that was a stance that we took from the very beginning. And I think a lot of people related to that because, there's a lot of theoretical knowledge on the internet and factual knowledge on the internet, but how do you activate that knowledge into practice, especially if you're working in this industry or collaborating with industry, is a very important thing. And a lot of people really resonated with that and gathered around it. So once you have that, value proposition, that epic meaning, a bunch of people gather around you, but then you have to engage them because otherwise they're just going to get bored and leave. And it is important to remember that engagement is different than entertainment. You're not trying to necessarily create, an audience, a fan base. You're trying to create a community, which means that you really have to empower these people to do something that is meaningful to them. In our case, it ended up being projects. We tried many, many different things. We tried, inviting a lot of speakers to talk. We tried, doing workshops that were theoretical. But ultimately, what we saw people really resonated with was doing projects. That was very, very engaging because it really enables them to do something that they couldn't do otherwise. So to give you some examples, we do these experiential learning workshops. This is mostly with corporates. So, instead of going to a corporate and giving them a bunch of theory, what we do is that we ask them, what is a use case you're interested to do? Bring your team. We help them. We provide some curated content and knowledge to them, and they use it to do that use case, and we help them go through it. So it is extremely effective. They really, really learn what they're trying to do because they're doing a use case using it. Contribution to open source has worked really well for us. It is very meaningful because a lot of the major open source projects are trying to tackle interesting problems, and at the same time, they are very inclusive. They're trying to be open and accessible, and everybody can use them. So it's something that community people really relate to and want to. It gives them a purpose. They are interested to participate. The next one that we tried and worked really well was sort of a mentorship, like an informal mentorship. So we identified a lot of people who were very, high caliber experts, and enabled them to form groups where people gathered around them to discuss theory, but in some cases also do hands-on work, sort of community and personal projects. And, people really love that because, it was giving them access to experts that they don't otherwise have access to. And that was very, very, very valuable. The one that I'm most excited about is, we started partnering with the startups and even recently with government agencies to bring in interesting R&D projects and put these into our community and mobilize our community to solve these problems. And usually there is a cash prize, so it's sort of a competition, and people get really excited about these. Like, they solve very, very interesting problems, especially in the case of startups. Obviously startups don't have a lot of resources. There's money and or expertise, and our community is like really thirsty to solve interesting problems. So it's a very, very interesting win-win. And we've been doing it for a while, and it works really well. So the message is that, if you're building a community, you need to empower people to do something. You have to figure out what that something is. But, my gut feeling is that, especially for AI-related topics, enabling them to do projects is a very, very good way to get them to interact with you and whatever you're offering. So I, threw in knowledge here and there a bunch of times, but the reason for it is that, in my opinion, knowledge is the most fundamental enabler. Like, if you make access to knowledge easy and remove the barriers from it for people to reach it and then consume it, and then help them activate it into practice, you can do phenomenal things. In our community, to some extent organically and to some extent by design, what started happening was that sort of a think tank was formed. Like, as I said, we do these discussion groups where people gather and talk about these are like, normal people meeting on weekends or something like that. So they meet every week. They pick up a research paper and read it and discuss it. They pick up a GitHub repository, and go through it and discuss it. So it is really this intellectual interaction between people, and they're from all corners of the world. Like sometimes, like for example, in our natural language processing group, you have people from all the way from India, from Middle East, Europe, and North America, and they all gather every week, like every weekend, really, to talk about topics in natural language processing they care about. And that intellectual interaction and cross-pollination really helps them understand and learn and stay up to date, which I think is very, very valuable. And it really sets the basis for the next level, which is a very product and application focused hands-on experiences, like the projects that I mentioned. So if that think tank that didn't exist, it would have been very hard to activate people to do hands-on work. And the backbone of knowledge that we have underneath all of this is really the way that the knowledge in think tank is kept and then transferred into the hands-on projects. But all of this is really towards what we're hoping to do eventually, which is innovation without borders. Like a lot of the R&D projects that I mentioned, the startups might be from Canada or from the United States, but really the participants are from all over the world. In the last project that we did, interestingly, we had a few people from Turkey. So really people from all around the world come together to build a project to solve a meaningful problem for a startup or some other entity that we work with, some other organization. So really, providing this knowledge, this curated knowledge, this access to experts, this think tank, and these hands-on experiences ultimately comes to this very core mission that we have, which is enabling people to innovate without thinking about where I live. Like that's almost unimportant. And we see it very clear in our community that people come together and do very, very interesting things when they're enabled and encouraged. So where we are going, what is the future for us? So I talked about community quite a bit and, emphasized really the fact that we interact with researchers and practitioners in AI quite a bit. But, as I mentioned, we recently started to working with the startups. And really, that's been a very, very fulfilling experience for us and for our community. And even in some cases, investors got involved with us. And, in one case, actually, one investor purchased a community project that somebody has done, and, we put it on our YouTube channel. So there are a lot of interesting things that start happening when you have a community and allow people to connect. But of course, government as the enabler of innovation at large scale has a very fundamental role. And we have started some conversations with government of Canada to get engaged in some of the research and development projects that the government has. And it's very interesting that the government of Canada has this mandate of, leveraging communities to carry out these R&D projects. This is exactly what we are about. So that's quite interesting. And of course, corporates are very big players who make a huge difference in how everything happens. So really thinking about this beyond just the community and more about an ecosystem. One day I'm hoping that we can get to a point where we are enabling people to start companies. There is actually a discussion group that we have currently who's trying to build a product of their own and probably start a company out of it. So all of these emergent phenomena happens when you have, engagement, enablement through knowledge, and access to, peers and experts that will help you do things that you want. So I'm really hoping to go forward.
I guess this is the closing remark. Am I right with that? Because
yes, this is the last one.
That's really the headlines that I got from your presentation. I want to talk to you later if you have some opportunity about this engagement side.
Definitely.
So you have your email here, and people can contact you through Trai or through this email.
Yes.
So shall I go to my next speaker?
Yep, sounds great. Thank you.